You've heard about the pharaohs, right? Pyramids, gold, Cleopatra, the whole ancient Egypt vibe. But what if I told you the most powerful pharaohs weren't even Egyptian, and they were black? Yeah, this isn't some conspiracy video. We've gotten the receipts, from buried artifacts to denied museum exhibits. There's a whole chapter of African history that Egypt doesn't want you to see. And once you hear what really happened to the Black Pharaohs, you'll never look at Egypt the same way again. They ruled with gold, commanded armies, built temples that rivaled the pyramids. And yet, their names are barely whispered in the corridors of Egyptian history. The Black Pharaohs of Nubia weren't just a side note. They were kings, pharaohs, conquerors. But here's the wild part. Despite ruling as Egypt's 25th dynasty, they're mostly missing from textbooks, documentaries, and museum walls. Why? Let's back up for a second. When most people think of Egypt, they imagine something out of Hollywood. Light-skinned royals in linen robes, Cleopatra with blue eyes, gods with golden staffs. That image? Carefully curated. From movies to museum exhibits, Egypt is painted as more Mediterranean than African. But that's only part of the story. The polished, marketable version. See, south of Egypt, along the Nile in what's now northern Sudan, thrived an ancient kingdom called Nubia. And Nubia wasn't just some neighbor. They were cultural cousins, trading, fighting, influencing each other for centuries. But in the 8th century BCE, something major happened. The Nubians didn't just visit Egypt, they conquered it. And for nearly 100 years, they ruled it. This was the era of the Black Pharaohs, a dynasty of rulers who saw themselves as the true restorers of Egyptian tradition. Leaders like Piye, Shabaka, and Taharqa didn't just wear the crown. They embraced the rituals, the gods, the architecture. In fact, many scholars say they were more Egyptian than the Egyptians had been for centuries. But here's where it gets messy. Despite their achievements, modern Egypt rarely acknowledges these rulers. Visit the Cairo Museum and try to find a full exhibit on the 25th dynasty. Good luck! Some artifacts are hidden in storage. Others aren't labeled clearly. It's almost like someone's trying to write them out of the narrative. And it's not just silence. Sometimes it's outright denial. There have been interviews, official statements, even academic pushback dismissing the Nubian dynasty as foreign invaders or minimizing their contributions entirely. But ask yourself this: if these pharaohs built temples, led armies, and ruled from Thebes, how are they not considered part of Egyptian history? A big part of the answer lies in how we talk about race and identity, especially in the Middle East and North Africa. Egypt today identifies primarily as Arab. There's a strong cultural and political alignment with the Arab world. So when people bring up the African roots of Egyptian history, especially its black African rulers, it clashes with the modern national identity. Add to that the colonial legacy of archaeology. Early European Egyptologists brought their own racial biases. When they found statues with clearly African features, many labeled them as anomalies or claimed they were products of mixed blood. They couldn't believe that black Africans could have created something as advanced as Egyptian civilization. And those assumptions stuck, not just in academic circles, but in global consciousness. But But the truth didn't disappear. It just got buried, sometimes literally. In Nubia, ruins of pyramids still stand. Inscriptions tell stories of conquest and governance. Statues with unmistakably African features still exist, some in basements, some behind glass, some forgotten. And the people, Nubians, are still here. They speak their language, they preserve their traditions. Many of them remember the stories that history books ignore. They remember that their ancestors once ruled the land of the Pharaohs. They remember being displaced when the Aswan Dam flooded their villages. And they remember being told, again and again, that Egypt was not their story to claim. But history isn't just what's in the books. It's what survives. It's what we choose to remember. And once you learn about the Black Pharaohs, you start to see just how much has been left out. Not just in Egypt, but across the entire African continent. So the next time you see an image of ancient Egypt, ask yourself, what's missing? Because behind the gold and the gods and the monuments, there's a deeper, darker truth. A truth that was almost erased, but not quite. And here's the kicker. The story of the Black Pharaohs didn't just fade away with time. It's still alive, still part of the African identity today, even if it's been obscured by decades of historical whitewashing. The Nubian legacy, though downplayed by many, is still carried in the hearts of modern Nubians who continue to fight for recognition, for their history, and for their place in Egypt's narrative. But Egypt, as a modern nation, is caught in a dilemma. On one hand, it cherishes its ancient past. The pyramids, the Sphinx, the temples. They're symbols of national pride, the epitome of civilization. But on the other hand, the Egyptian state has often distanced itself from its African heritage. The Arab identity, heavily influenced by centuries of Islamic rule and pan-Arab nationalism, has shaped how Egypt sees itself today. And that has led to the marginalization of its African roots. You might think, why is this such a big deal? Why does it matter that Egypt downplays its African roots? Well, it matters because history shapes identity. If we erase the Black Pharaohs, we erase an entire legacy of African power, leadership, and culture. We rob future generations of an understanding of Africa's deep influence on world history. And we reduce the complexity of African identity to a single story of colonization and oppression. The modern Nubians, who once ruled Egypt with unmatched power, still face their own battles. They were displaced when the Aswan High Dam was built, flooding their ancient lands and creating one of the largest human migrations in Egyptian history. Entire villages were lost, and with them, centuries of cultural heritage. Today, Nubians still struggle for recognition, for their ancestral land, and for a say in the narrative of Egypt's past. In Sudan, where the ancient kingdom of Kush once thrived, the Nubian people continue to reclaim their history and culture. But in Egypt, the struggle is far from over. For too long, the narrative has been dominated by a desire to fit Egypt into the larger Arab and Mediterranean story, leaving its African roots behind. But those roots are too deep to ignore forever. In recent years, however, there has been a slow shift. More voices are emerging, calling for a re-examination of Egypt's past. Scholars, activists, and even Egyptians themselves are beginning to question the way Egypt's history has been told. They're reclaiming the stories of the Nubian pharaohs, bringing attention to their achievements, their contributions, and their rightful place in the legacy of Egypt. the Nubian pharaohs may not have been able to change the history books of their time, but the world is waking up to their story now. Slowly but surely, people are starting to realize that Egypt's history is not just the story of one group, one ethnicity, or one people. It's the story of Africa, a continent that has been at the heart of human civilization for millennia. And maybe, just maybe, Egypt will one day recognize that it's not just the cradle of civilization, it's also the cradle of African civilization. The truth is slowly coming to light, no longer hidden in basements or buried under the sands of time. So the next time you think of ancient Egypt, think about the Black Pharaohs. Think about Nubia. Think about the fact that Egypt, as we know it, was shaped not just by the Mediterranean world, but by the powerful black rulers who came from the south. History isn't just written in books, it's written in the stones, in the statues, and in the stories that survive, even when they're almost erased. The Black Pharaohs didn't just rule Egypt, they were Egypt. And their legacy, though ignored for centuries, will never fade completely.